Hey there everyone, and welcome to this video. In this video we're going to be talking about virtual networks, what is a VNet in Azure, and we're going to be doing a little bit of reviewing and some of the components. So hopefully we're going to go and do some diagramming and show it on the Azure portal how and what is a virtual network, and hopefully how you can take advantage of knowing this concept better and learning some bits along the way. All right, so what is a virtual network? The virtual network is going to be where all the resources in Azure are going to live and be allocated. This could be resources such as virtual machines, web apps, containers, databases, platform as a services, things like SQL databases, things like your logic apps, function apps, and many, many more. So anything that can have a private IP is going to be allocated on a VNet. And VNets, they have address spaces, so they're going to have a range from where we can take part of our IP addressing, and we're going to take and assign IPs from that range of IPs. It's all virtualized, so this is similar to on-premises Hyper-V or VMware. So for instance, I have Hyper-V here, and if we go to my virtual switch manager, you're going to notice that I have a default switch. So this is more or less, it acts as the network or our virtual network for anything that we create inside this hypervisor. So we can create external, internal, or private virtual network switches. And it's pretty much the same concept in Azure. So this relates to virtualization. We essentially have machines, physical machines in Azure. They are called nodes. And within those nodes, they have container virtual machines. So because everything is virtualized, we have a virtual network that is essentially where all our virtual machines will run. And there's a few things here that we're going to touch on each of these one by one. If we go here, and first thing is, let me bring up my diagram. We're going to have a virtual network here. So this can be your virtual network with some address space that you assign to it. You can have a subnet, and then of course you can create your resources here, set your virtual machines, set your SQL servers, set your web application services, and then you can assign private IPs from this address range. So like that 4, or maybe 10.2.1.5, and 10.2.1.6. So we're going to be looking into this in the portal, but more or less, this is the concept. We have a virtual network, which is going to be a bigger address space, and then we can divide that in subnets or smaller address spaces. So if we go to Azure and we go here, just going to go and create a new resource group. We're going to call this RG001. Very creative on my part. I'm going to put this on region South Central US. One thing about Azure and clouds in general is always consider the region where you're putting resources, as they are going to be different costs per resource on each region. So I'll try to choose a cheap region, and there's some documents that explain what is the cost on every one of them for resources. So South Central US is a good one. And there's like a few others that you can use, like North Central US, and they're going to be much cheaper compared to other regions like East US, for example. So I'm going to go and create this resource group. And then I'm going to look for my resource group once it appears. Sometimes this will happen. And if I go here, here's my resource group. I'm just going to go ahead and go create resources. And we'll be looking for virtual network. So you can also click this section here. This allows you to find the resources faster. So I'm gonna go create my virtual network. You can always read some of the important things here, like overview, plans, usage information. But I'm just gonna go and create. I'm gonna put this on my resource group 001 that I just created, and I'm gonna call this VNET 001 just to go along, and let's say blue. So that looks like our diagram. Here there are a few options. So we have virtual network encryption. If we want to encrypt all the traffic that goes through our virtual machines, we can do that. This is especially useful for highly secure or tight environments like financing or banking. We have Azure Bastion, which allows us to make secure connectivity to our virtual machines using RDP and SSH over TLS. So what this means is essentially we can control our machines from the Azure portal without having to assign them a public IP. So it's a more secure option for management of our machines. And we have the option to integrate Azure Firewall and Azure DDoS protection for denial of services attack. And this, of course, improves security. And they come with a cost. So depending on your needs, you might have and go and create these. You can always create them individually later, but just some of the options here. I'm not gonna get any of them, so I'll just go next. And here we can create our address space. So the address space for a virtual network is anything that we want to choose to. Like I always said, the most important thing is consider what's gonna be your scenario. So you're going to have different address spaces as big or as small as you want them, depending on what's going to be your need, right? And always look up for what address spaces are already in use in your environment. So if in your own premises, you are already using 10.0000/16 and the 1/16 and the 2, the best advice that I can give you is not to use that space again on Azure. Otherwise, you may have to do netting or some other workaround. So we want to avoid that. Don't use overlapping address spaces. And I'm just going to create that too. And I'm going to change the name of my default subnet. So here you can have different subnet purposes. So this is a way that Azure makes our lives easier if we want to deploy a specific subnet. So like for Bastion or an Azure firewall. So this comes pre-populated. And the difference is essentially the name. All these names, they are reserved for these functions. But in my case, I'm just going to go select default. And I'm going to call these VM subnet. And I'm going to choose a /24. You can change this to be as small or as big as you want. And so we have private subnets here. And this is an important concept, so let's read it. We're going to review it together. So private subnets, they enhance security by not providing default outbound access. So to enable outbound connectivity for virtual machines to access the internet, it's necessary to explicitly grant outbound access. So what is outbound access? If we go here, and this is just this is for an article on the public documents. This is what outbound access means. Essentially, it's the way that we allow connectivity to go out from our virtual machines or any resource on Azure to the internet. So when we deploy virtual machines nowadays on Azure, they have default outbound access, which what that means is we don't have to assign an explicit way for VMs to go to the internet. They can go to the internet by default. What happens is behind the scenes, virtual machines, they get assigned a pseudo public IP that's only used for outbound connectivity, and then they can navigate the internet. The thing about this is really not recommended. It's not a secure way to manage our resources in Azure. We don't really have any control of those public IPs that our virtual machines use to go out to the internet. And this is also not recommended because it's retiring soon. So if you have virtual machines that are using default outbound access nowadays, they're going to be retiring that soon on September 2025. So yeah, hopefully we want to allow explicit ways to connect out to the internet. And what are some ways that we can allow that outbound connectivity? So these are just a few ways, but we can essentially use NAT gateways. This is recommended. It's an optimal solution on Azure that it's scalable and reduces the risk of this NAT port exhaustion. It's essentially a product in Azure that is created with this function in mind. We can use network virtual appliances. So this is going to be our virtual routers, virtual firewalls, maybe from a vendor that we like, Palo Alto, Cisco, FortiGate, Checkpoint, any vendor, and we can use those to navigate out to the internet through them. We can use an Azure firewall. We can use public Azure load balancers, like in this case. We can use public IPs assigned to the machines individually. This, of course, doesn't scale as well and may have some security implications that we have to consider. So this is something very important to know. And you can, of course, check this option and then consider this ahead of time. So for now, and for demonstration purposes, I'm just going to leave this clear. I'm not going to select it. We have a few other options. We can associate this subnet with a NAT gateway. We can associate it with a network security group and a route table. And these two are two important concepts that we're going to touch on today. So let's go and take a look at them. So what is a network security group? So a network security group, or NSG, is essentially going to be layer 4 or layer 3 rules on our OSI model, right? So you can block at IP level or you can block at port or protocol level. This is a very real example of how a network security group can be set up. This is just a few rules that you can put in place. So they always come with some default rules like these three. This is to allow connectivity between the VNets. So there's one for VNET Outbound and VNET Inbound. We have a rule to allow anything that comes from an Azure load balancer. And we have an Outbound rule for allowing internet connectivity when our VMs want to go out to the internet. And here we have a few other rules that I created. So this is, in my case, I put it a rule to allow any connectivity from my public IP. I have a rule, I have a web server that runs on my virtual network. So in this case, I have two rules to allow web traffic. One that allows IPv4 web traffic and one that allows IPv6 and port 80 and 443 for HTTP and HTTPS. And these are some of the rules. Of course, you can get really granular and you can use them for multiple reasons. But these are that are pretty more or less ACLs or access control lists to allow what traffic do we want to permit or deny. So they work by priority, and the higher the priority, that's going to be the first that is evaluated. So if we have a deny rule here that is 110, and then we have an allow rule, if the deny rule has a higher priority, that will be evaluated first. So this is evaluate, match a condition, and if that matches, then we apply the rule. So always keep that in mind and plan around that whenever you design your virtual networks. So this is just for layer 3, layer 4 again. And it's not the only way that we have to secure our virtual networks, but just one of the ways. The other important thing about network security groups is they can be attached to your network interface card or to your subnet. And if we bring in our diagram here, just for instance, let's say we have these 3 virtual machines here. So we have the option, and we can just go ahead and create a network security group that will attach individually to each of the network cards of these resources. Or if we want to simplify a little bit and we use the same rules for anything that lives within this subnet, we can just go and create the association with the network security group and the subnet. The other one is user-defined route tables. So what are these? This is the way that we have to, or one of the ways that we have control over routing in Azure. So in Azure, let's say we want to have our virtual appliance or we want to have our firewall. And we want to make sure that all the traffic that goes out to the internet is routed through the firewall so we can analyze it for security purposes. And there might be many reasons, right? Like we want to influence the routing. So this is what route tables are for. We can create routes based on the destination and what's going to be our next hop. So here I just created like a few examples. This is a rule that essentially routes all traffic to a virtual appliance with this private IP. So this can be like that rule that we were talking with the firewall. This is just a rule that I created for when I want to go to, let's say, my public IP. This is just a random IP, but you can put your, let's say, on-premises public IP, and you can have that to go directly to the internet. So that could be useful when you have like a jump box on premises and you want to only allow connectivity from that specific place. You can create something like this, which is a /32. And that way you can sort of, let's say, bypass the firewall for remote access. And here I created like one example. Let's say that maybe you have a different firewall that handles connectivity to one of your other locations. So maybe like a route to your finance network, and you can have a different NetHub IP address. So these are routes that we can create, and we can then associate this with any of our subnets in Azure. And that's a bit of an overview there. The priority in Azure for routing, this is going to be very important. Longest prefix match always wins. And what this means is the more specific that the route is going to be the route selected. So we have, let's say we have two routes. We have one that goes to this location on /24, and we have this one that goes on /16. This one's going to be more specific. It's going to be along the prefix match. So if we want to go, let's say, to 10.1.0.25, this is going to be preferred over this because it has a longer or a higher CIDR range. Now, if let's say we have multiple routes that they all have the same prefix, maybe we have 2/16s, this is when we have to know what is our routing priority in Azure. So if we have a route that is defined with a UDR, a user-defined route, that's going to be always preferred. Second, we have BGP routes. And third, we have system routes. So let's say we have a match and that route is being learned from these three different places. This will be the order that is going to be selected from our virtual machines whenever forwarding the traffic. So this is a very important one. UDRs always wins if there is a match. Then comes BGP and then system routes. So system routes is another concept in Azure about the routes are going to be put by default in Azure. So this is the route within our own virtual network, peer virtual networks, and just any other address space that Azure might learn by default. Let's get back here to our subnet menu. We can select service endpoints for different services on Azure. We're not going to talk about those today. Subnet delegation, policies for private endpoints. I don't need none of that at the moment. So we have here our virtual network and we have our subnet defined. So we're just going to create and go nets, and then review and create. Let's create that. And that should deploy rather quickly. So that's complete. So I'm just going to go and check my virtual network. And here we have multiple options that we have available for our virtual network. And here we can see our address space. We can create other address spaces if there might be any need for that. We can see the connected devices. I don't have any yet because I just created these. We can create subnets. We can associate these subnets with different NSGs or route tables that we create later on. We have the option for Bastion, DDoS protection, Azure Firewall, they're all here. We can define what DNS servers do we want to use on the virtual network. And this is defined at the virtual network level, or you can also define it by network interface. So, you will always use the default Azure provided DNS, or you can use your custom DNS server. So this can be, let's say, anything within your network, or it can be even like public DNS servers. We have the option to create VNet peerings. This is when we have two VNets and we want to connect them together. We have service endpoints, which allow us to connect to platform as a service resources, things like storage accounts, SQL servers, and web applications, or any platform as a service resource. These are ways that we can create like a more private or direct channel to do services within Azure. We have private endpoints, which is very similar, but instead of having IPs from the Azure address space, we can create our own private IPs within our virtual network and assign those to different resources. And yeah, there's definitely interesting things that we can see from here. But yeah, here you can take a look at our address space, DNS servers, virtual network ID. And to further this explanation, we're just going to deploy some services here on our virtual network. And we're going to do a quick connectivity test to see how that's working. All right, so let's go here. And then I'm going to go back to my resource group. There's a few ways that we can do this. We can look it through our search bar, or we can just go here and create. And I'm gonna look for a virtual machine. So I'm just gonna select this Ubuntu server, this deploy very quickly. And we're gonna create a virtual machine running Linux. I'm gonna call this VM001. I'm not gonna put it on an availability zone. I'm just gonna select the standard to make it as simple as possible. And then here we can select the size for our virtual machines. So the more resources that we put on it, the more expensive that's gonna be monthly. So I'm just gonna go with this smaller SKU. And you can use SSH public keys, you can use passwords. I'm just gonna go and create DOM admin password for a virtual machine. Here we have the option if we want to allow certain ports. I'm gonna have this as yes for now. But to be honest, you should always configure your network security groups, especially if it's for like an actual environment that you will run. If this is for a test, yeah, you might do this if you will delete your resource rather sooner than later. So I'm just gonna allow SSH here for now, just because it's a test environment. And we can select our standard SSD. Gonna take another video if you like this series to explain more about the options on a virtual machine if you like. But let's just go and review for networking. We have the option here to select our virtual network. So notice because this is on the same region and this is the only virtual network that I have, it's already selected. I'm gonna give a public IP and we can just go ahead and create. And I'll create another VM. So I'll just go and edit that part out and I'll see you in a bit. All right, so at this time, our two VMs have been deployed. And let's do a connectivity test. So we have two virtual machines. They are located on the same virtual network. Can they talk to each other? Let's find out. So if we go here to our VM001, there's a few ways that we can connect to it. We have this connect option. And one of the ways to do that is SSH using the Azure CLI. This is an option that we can have. And we can do that. It's gonna, if we go here and configure and connect, that should help us to open a connection to it rather quickly. We can connect using native SSH. So this is what I'm gonna do. I'm just gonna go and copy my public IP here. I'm gonna go and open my terminal, and I'm gonna go and do SSH with our admin to that public IP. I'm gonna set the key, and then I'm gonna put my password, and that should allow us to connect to your virtual machine. So that's there, and we can check that the public IP that is assigned to it is the same one that appears on the portal. So here that is, then that 2.0.4, and let's do a connectivity test. Can we reach out to VM002? If we go to VM002 and we look at its private IP, is 10.2.0.5. So let's see, can we pin 10.2.0.5? And the answer is yes, we can. So we have connectivity within our two virtual machines in Azure. We have created them, and we can see that they can talk to each other. If I want to test, if let's say my SSH port is open for that machine, we can do that for port 22. We can see that that is succeeded, so that TCP port is open. So we could potentially connect to that machine from here as well, right? And yep, that means we are on VM002 with this private IP, and they are perfectly working with our virtual network. So what that will look like is we have our two virtual machines, and this is not a SQL server, but this will help. And they can talk within the same virtual network by default. Even if we put a basic NSG that we actually have on the virtual network, and we can check that because we had that option open, or we had that option selected. these NSGs, they allow for VNet to VNet communication by using these two rules. This is the rule that is allowing me to access my machine using SSH. If I were to remove this, I wouldn't be able to do what I just did using my terminal. So that's for our video today. Hope that you enjoy it. If you did, please like and subscribe. I'm going to be uploading more content about Azure and different IT technology topics. And if you have any questions, please feel free to leave it on the comments. Otherwise, I wish you a great rest of your day, and thank you for watching.